You have 10 minutes every morning that you are wasting. Not wasting on something trivial, but wasting on the illusion that you can become strong by accident. That discipline will emerge naturally. That psychological integration happens without deliberate practice. Carl Jung understood that the difference between those who achieve mastery over their own lives and those who remain fragmented is not talent or luck or circumstance. It is the willingness to use the morning as a laboratory for the self. 10 minutes, that is all it requires. But those 10 minutes must be spent in a way that most people find unbearable, in confrontation with who you actually are beneath the performance. You wake up and immediately begin performing. You check messages, scan notifications, consume content created by others before you have generated a single original thought of your own. This is not harmless. It is a form of psychological abdication. You are handing authority over your internal state to forces that do not care about your wholeness, your growth, your truth. And you do this because the alternative is uncomfortable. The alternative requires you to sit with yourself in silence and face what rises when there is no distraction to suppress it. Winners, in the Jungian sense, are not people who dominate others. They are people who have integrated their shadow. They are people who have stopped running from their own depths. They are people who have learned that strength is not about control but about presence. And they have learned this through practice, through the daily discipline of meeting themselves fully before they meet the world. 10 minutes is enough, but only if those 10 minutes are spent doing what your ego desperately wants to avoid. The secret is not complex. It is brutally simple. You sit, you breathe. You notice what is present in your body and your thoughts in the space between stimulus and reaction. You do not try to fix anything. You do not try to improve anything. You do not try to become more motivated or more disciplined or more positive. You simply observe. You allow the unconscious material to surface without judgment, without suppression, without the need to immediately translate it into action or insight. This is the practice Jung called active imagination, though he did not package it as a morning routine. He understood it as the fundamental method by which the conscious mind learns to communicate with the unconscious. Most people cannot do this for even 3 minutes, not because they lack time, but because they lack the capacity to be with themselves without distraction. They have been conditioned to believe that their own interiority is boring, that silence is wasted time, that productivity requires constant motion. But Jung saw that this is precisely the trap. The more you avoid the descent into your own depths, the more fragmented you become. The more you rely on external validation, external stimulation, external structure to tell you who you are, and the more fragile your psychological foundation becomes. Winners are not people who never feel doubt. They are people who have learned to hold doubt without collapsing into it. They are people who can feel fear and still act. They can feel inadequacy and still show up. They can feel the full weight of their shadow and not be destroyed by it. This capacity is not innate. It is cultivated. And it is cultivated in the morning, in the 10 minutes when you practice being with yourself exactly as you are, not as you wish you were. The shadow does not wait for convenient moments. It emerges when your defenses are down, when you are tired, when you are alone, when the persona has no audience to perform for. The morning is when the shadow is closest to the surface. You have not yet constructed the day's narrative. You have not yet decided which version of yourself you will present to the world. And in that liminal space, everything you have been avoiding is right there. The resentment you have been sublimating into niceness. The ambition you have been hiding behind humility. The rage you have been channeling into perfectionism. The grief you have been numbing with busyness. If you fill that space immediately, if you reach for your phone or your coffee or your to-do list, you are training yourself to avoid depth. You are teaching your psyche that its messages are not welcome, that its signals should be ignored, that the only acceptable internal state is one of constant readiness to perform. And over time, this creates a split, a fracture between who you are and who you pretend to be, between what you feel and what you allow yourself to acknowledge, between your authentic impulses and the carefully curated version of yourself that you present to others. This split is exhausting. It requires constant energy to maintain. It makes you reactive, defensive, brittle. You become someone who cannot tolerate criticism because any challenge to your persona feels like an existential threat. You become someone who cannot rest because stillness allows the unconscious to speak. You become someone who is always performing, always proving, always seeking validation, and never quite feeling like it is enough. Jung called this the inflation of the ego. It happens when you identify so completely with your persona that you forget there is anything beneath it. You believe you are your achievements, your roles, your reputation. And when those things are threatened, you feel like you are dissolving, because you have no ground beneath the performance. You have no relationship with the self that exists independent of external validation. The 10-minute morning practice is how you begin to reverse this. You stop identifying with the persona and start recognizing it for what it is. A necessary tool for navigating social reality, but not the totality of who you are. You begin to build a relationship with the self beneath the mask. And you do this not through thinking about it, or reading about it, or talking about it, but through the direct experience of sitting with yourself in silence and noticing what is actually present. This is not meditation in the spiritual sense. It is not about achieving a particular state of mind or reaching enlightenment. It is psychological work. It is the work of becoming conscious, of bringing the unconscious into awareness, of retrieving the fragments of yourself that you have disowned because they did not fit the image you were trying to maintain. And it is uncomfortable. It is supposed to be uncomfortable. Growth always is. Winners understand this. They understand that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is changing, that old patterns are being disrupted, that new capacities are being developed. They do not avoid discomfort. They lean into it. They use it as information. They ask themselves, what is this discomfort protecting me from? What would I have to face if I allowed myself to feel this fully? These are Jungian questions. They assume that every psychological defense exists for a reason, that every avoidance pattern is protecting you from something the ego perceives as threatening, and that true strength comes not from maintaining those defenses indefinitely, but from becoming conscious of them so that you can choose whether they still serve you. The 10 minutes is not about becoming a better person. It is not about self-improvement or optimization or reaching some ideal version of yourself. It is about becoming real, about stripping away the layers of performance and pretense and meeting yourself as you actually are, with all your contradictions, all your wounds, all your unresolved material, and discovering that you do not need to be perfect to be whole. This is threatening to the ego because the ego survives by comparing, by judging, by maintaining the illusion that you are better than or worse than others. But the self does not compare. It simply is. And when you spend 10 minutes every morning reconnecting with that deeper sense of self, you begin to notice how much energy you have been wasting on maintaining the persona, on defending the ego, on trying to control how others perceive you. You cannot control how others perceive you. You can only control how present you are with yourself. And when you are truly present, when you have done the work of integrating your shadow, when you have stopped abandoning yourself for the sake of approval, something shifts in how you move through the world. You become less reactive. You become less defensive. You become less dependent on outcomes because your sense of worth is no longer tied to external validation. Other people will notice this. They will sense that you are not performing in the same way. They will feel unsettled by your groundedness, by your lack of need for their approval. This is projection. When someone is living entirely from their persona, they experience your authenticity as an implicit criticism. They interpret your silence as judgment. They interpret your self-sufficiency as arrogance. But this is their work to do, not yours. Jung taught that you cannot individuate for anyone else. You can only do your own work and trust that it will speak for itself. The morning practice is where you learn to hold the tension between opposites, between discipline and flexibility, between strength and vulnerability, between confidence and humility. These are not contradictions. They are paradoxes. And the capacity to hold paradox is the mark of psychological maturity. It is what separates those who remain trapped in black and white thinking from those who can navigate complexity with grace. Winners are not people who have eliminated doubt or fear or insecurity. They are people who have learned to hold those experiences without being controlled by them. They have learned that you can feel uncertain and still act. You can feel inadequate and still show up. You can feel the full weight of your humanness and not collapse under it. This is integration. This is what it means to reclaim the shadow. The shadow is not your enemy. It is the repository of everything you have judged as unacceptable. Everything you have been taught to hide, to suppress, to deny. Your anger, your desire, your selfishness, your pettiness, your jealousy, your ambition, all of it. And as long as those parts remain unconscious, they control you. They emerge as compulsions, as projections, as inexplicable reactions that you cannot understand or manage. But when you bring them into awareness, when you acknowledge them without judgment, they lose their power over you. They become resources instead of liabilities. 10 minutes every morning. That is all it takes to begin this work. You sit, you breathe, you notice, you allow. You do not try to change anything. You do not try to fix anything. You simply practice being with yourself without distraction, without judgment, without the need to be anywhere other than where you are. And slowly, over weeks and months, this changes everything. You stop seeking validation because you are validating yourself through presence rather than through achievement. You stop fearing judgment because you are no longer judging yourself through the eyes of others. You stop performing because you are no longer trying to convince anyone that you are acceptable. You simply are. And from that place of being, you act. Not from compulsion, not from fear, not from the need to prove, but from alignment with something deeper. This is what Jung meant by individuation. It is the process of becoming who you actually are instead of who you were conditioned to be. And it does not require years of therapy or elaborate spiritual practices or monastic discipline. It requires 10 minutes every morning. 10 minutes of willingness to turn inward instead of outward. 10 minutes of courage to face what you have been avoiding. 10 minutes of trust that you are more than your persona, more than your achievements, more than the roles you play. The world will tell you that winners are people who achieve the most, who accumulate the most, who dominate the most. But Jung knew that this is a lie. Real winners are people who have stopped fragmenting themselves for approval. People who have integrated their shadow. People who have learned to be present with their own depths. And they are not born that way. They become that way through practice. Through the daily discipline of meeting themselves fully in the morning before they meet the demands of the world. You have 10 minutes. You have always had 10 minutes. The question is whether you are willing to spend them on becoming real instead of becoming acceptable. On becoming integrated instead of becoming impressive. On becoming grounded instead of becoming praised. This is the secret. This is the practice. This is what separates those who live from their depths from those who live from their defenses. Every morning you choose. You can begin your day by giving your attention away, by letting the world colonize your consciousness before you have even established your own ground. Or you can begin by sitting in silence, by breathing, by noticing what is present, by allowing the unconscious to speak. This is not selfish. It is foundational. You cannot show up for others if you have not first shown up for yourself. You cannot offer presence if you have not cultivated it within. The 10-minute morning secret is not a hack. It is not a shortcut. It is the hard work of becoming conscious, of integrating what you have been disowning, of building a relationship with the self beneath the persona. And it will not make you more likable or more successful or more impressive, but it will make you real. It will make you whole. It will make you someone who can hold complexity, tolerate ambiguity, and move through the world without constantly needing it to validate your existence. This is what it means to be a winner in the only sense that matters. Not someone who defeats others, but someone who has stopped abandoning themselves. Not someone who never falls apart, but someone who has learned to come back together. Again and again and again. 10 minutes every morning, that is all it takes, and that is everything.